All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously fascinating historical anecdote about the sheer power of unwavering belief. We're looking at one very specific moment in time, pulled from a daily reader, that absolutely nails the tension between human limitations and, well, absolute conviction.
Section 1. A Ship in the Fog. The 1873 Transatlantic Delay.
Picture this. You're on a highly anticipated journey, and out of nowhere, you are just completely stopped in your tracks by forces totally outside your control. So what actually happens when a critical journey is halted by nature? I mean, it's a frustrating scenario we can all relate to, right? But for the subject of our source material today, the stakes felt incredibly high.
We're dropping right into the year 1873. A ship bound for America is suddenly trapped in this blinding, impossibly thick Atlantic fog. And we're not talking about a quick delay here. The text notes they were literally halted for days in these conditions. This massive weather event was threatening to make a very important passenger miss what he firmly believed was a divinely appointed meeting back in the States.
Section 2. Who was Dwight L. Moody? The man on the ship. To really understand the stakes of this delay, we gotta pause for a second and look at exactly who was on that ship.
Now, what's super interesting here is that this whole story comes directly from a daily devotional reading called Golden Bells, specifically the entry for August 10th. It frames Dwight L. Moody not just as, a prominent historical figure of his time, but really as a vessel for this incredibly specific, enduring lesson about faith. Looking at his background, the text outlines a pretty remarkable trajectory. He started out in very modest, humble circumstances, but he eventually evolved into this worldwide renowned evangelist. People knew him everywhere for his passionate preaching. Plus, he was a massive institution builder, founding Christian organizations that left a huge legacy. By 1873, he'd just finished drawing these record-breaking massive crowds on a preaching tour across Europe. He was riding this wave of immense global momentum. And then, boom, right at the absolute peak of the success, on his triumphant return voyage to America, he is completely halted by fog. The contrast between that unstoppable momentum and this sudden dead stop is just striking.
Section 3. The Power of Absolute Faith. A Simple Prayer. Realizing this delay was going to cost him a meeting he firmly believed God wanted him at, Moody didn't just throw his hands up and resign himself to the weather. No, he took immediate, radical action.
The text tells us he turned to a fellow believer on the ship with this wildly direct, confident invitation. He just says, "Let us go to the cabin and pray for the fog to be lifted." I mean, notice the absolute lack of ambiguity there. He wasn't asking for comfort or, just some patience during the delay. He was actively seeking a literal, physical intervention to change the weather.
So they head down to the cabin, and Moody offers what the text describes as a simple prayer. But here's where the narrative introduces this super relatable human element. After Moody prays, his companion actually hesitates to join in. Even though he's a fellow believer, he kind of doubts the outcome. Or maybe he's just shocked by the sheer audacity of making such a specific request.
And that leads to this crucial, incredibly punchy response from Moody, completely shutting down that hesitation. He looks at his companion and just flatly states, "You don't believe God has lifted the fog, and I believe he already has, so there's no need for you to pray." Wow. He essentially tells the guy that just going through the motions of praying without having the absolute expectation of an answer is totally pointless.
This moment brilliantly highlights the dramatic contrast the source material is setting up for us. On one side, you have Moody's absolute certainty. He literally believed the fog was already gone before they even checked. And on the other side, you've got his companion's hesitation, completely doubting the effectiveness of what they just did. It's a perfect example of active faith versus passive doubt.
Well, the climax of this anecdote is swift and pretty stunning. The source simply states that when they stepped back up onto the deck, the fog was gone. That impenetrable Atlantic fog that had trapped this massive ship for days had literally vanished right after their brief exchange down in the cabin.
Section 4. Patient in Tribulation. The core lesson. Now, the devotional text doesn't just share this story so we can marvel at some crazy meteorological anomaly. No, it uses this incredible physical clearing of the fog to anchor a much deeper spiritual lesson.
And that brings us to the core biblical verse of the day from the text, which is Romans 12:12. Rejoice in hope, be patient in tribulation, be constant in prayer. The tribulation here is perfectly symbolized by that blinding fog, right? It's this frustrating, heavy period of waiting and uncertainty. The text is using Moody's story to remind readers to stay patient during those trials and to remain relentlessly constant in their prayers.
The source material wraps up with these really beautifully structured takeaways. It acknowledges a practical reality that, hey, answers to prayer don't always come exactly as we wish or, on our preferred timeline. But the text confidently asserts that they do happen. The conditions, according to the reading, are basically twofold. First, we must have faith, and second, and this is crucial, we have to actively watch for those answers, just like Moody walking straight back up to that deck, fully expecting to see clear skies.
Which leads us perfectly to the end of our explainer today. I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought inspired by Moody's unwavering certainty. Are you actively watching for the fog to lift in your own life? Seriously, when you're faced with a massive delay or a figurative fog, are you just passively waiting for things to change? Or are you actually watching with active expectation? It's a pretty powerful question to reflect on.